Chapter 62, in which we hear the fate of Ralph Nickleby. And those of you who have heard these recordings from the outset will remember that one of the stipulations I made right at the very beginning was to point out that Ralph was the real villain of the piece. We hear now what ultimately became of him. After he had left the Cheerables, he slunk off like a thief, groping with his hands when first he got into the street as if he were a blind man, and looking often over his shoulder while he hurried away, as though he were followed in imagination or reality by someone anxious to question or detain him. Ralph Nickleby left the city of London behind him and took the road to Golden Square, his own home. The night was dark and a cold wind blew, driving the clouds furiously and fast before it. There was one black, gloomy mass that seemed to follow him, not hurrying in the wild chase with the other clouds, but lingering sullenly behind and gliding darkly and stealthily on. He often looked back at this and more than once stopped to let it pass over, but somehow when he went forward again it was still behind him, coming mournfully and slowly up, like a shadowy funeral train. He had to pass a poor, mean burial ground, a dismal place, raised a few feet above the level of the street and parted from it by a low parapet wall with an iron railing. A rank, unwholesome, rotten spot, where the very grass and weeds seemed in their frowsy growth to tell that they had sprung from paupers' bodies and had struck their roots in the graves of men, sodden while alive in steaming courts and drunken, hungry dens. As he passed here, Ralph called to mind that he had been one of a jury long before on the body of a man who had cut his own throat, and that the man was buried there in that place. He could not tell how he came to recollect it now, when he had so often passed and never thought about him, or how it was that he felt an interest in the circumstance, but he did both. And stopping and clasping the iron railings with his hands, looked eagerly in, wondering which might be his grave. While he was thus engaged, there came towards him, with the noise of shouts and singing, some drunken fellows, followed by others who were remonstrating with them and urging them to go home in quiet. They were in high good humour, and one of them, a little weazen, hump-backed man, began to dance. He was a grotesque, fantastic figure, and the few bystanders laughed. Ralph himself was moved to mirth and echoed the laugh of one who stood near and looked round into his face. When they had passed on and he was left alone, he resumed his speculation with a new kind of interest, for he recollected that the last person who had seen the suicide alive had left him very merry, and he remembered how strange, and the other jurors had thought that at the time. He could not fix upon the spot among such a heap of graves, but he conjured up a strong and vivid idea of the man himself, and how he looked, and what had led him to cut his throat, all of which he recalled with ease. By dint of dwelling upon this theme, he carried the impression with him when he went away, as he remembered when a child, to have had frequently before him the figure of some goblin he had once seen chalked upon a door. But as he drew nearer and nearer home, he forgot it again, and began to think how very dull and solitary the house would be inside. This feeling became so strong at last that when he reached his own door, he could hardly make up his mind to turn the key and open it. When he had done that and gone into the passage, he felt as though to shut it again would be to shut out the world. But he let it go, and it closed with a loud noise. There was no light. How very dreary, cold, and still it was. Shivering from head to foot, he made his way up the stairs into the room in which he had last been disturbed. He made a kind of compact with himself that he wouldn't think of what had happened until he got home. He was at home now and suffered himself to consider it. His own child. His own child. He never doubted the tale. He felt it was true, knew it was true, as if he had been privy to it all along. His own child, and now dead too, dying beside Nicholas, loving him, looking upon him as something like an angel. That was the worst. They had all turned away from him and deserted him at his very hour of need. Even money couldn't buy them now. Everything must come out. Everybody must know all. Here was the young Lord Verisopht, dead. His companion, Sir Mulberry Hawk, abroad and beyond his reach. £10,000 gone at one blow. His plot with Gride overset at the moment of triumph. His after schemes discovered, himself in danger, the object of his persecution and Nicholas' love, his own wretched boy. Everything crumbled and fallen around him, and he beaten down beneath the ruins and grovelling in the dust. If he had grown up beneath his eye, he might have had a careless, indifferent, harsh way of being a father. He felt that, but the thought would come that he might have been otherwise, and that his son might have been a comfort to him, and the two might have been happy together. He began to think now that his supposed death and his wife's flight had some share in making him the morose, hard man he was. He seemed to remember a time when he was not quite so rough and obdurate, and almost thought that he had first hated Nicholas because he was young and gallant, and perhaps like the stripling who had brought dishonour and loss of fortune upon his own head. But that one tender thought, or of natural regret in his whirlwind of passion and remorse, was as a drop of calm water in a storm-maddened sea. His hatred of Nicholas had been fed upon by his own defeat, nourished on his own interference with his schemes, fattened upon his old defiance and success. There were reasons for its increase. It had grown and strengthened gradually. Now it attained a height which was sheer wild lunacy. That his, of all others, should have been the hands to rescue his miserable child. That he should have been his protector and faithful friend. That he should have shown him that love and tenderness which, from the wretched moment of his birth, he had never known. That he should have taught him to hate his own parent and execrate his very name. That he should now know and feel all this, and triumph in the recollection was gall and madness to the usurer's heart. The dead boy's love for Nicholas and the attachment of Nicholas for him was insupportable agony. The picture of his deathbed with Nicholas at his side, tending and supporting him, and he breathing out his thanks and expiring in his arms, when he would have had them mortal enemies and hating each other to the last, drove him frantic. He gnashed his teeth and smote the air, and looking wildly round with eyes which gleamed through the darkness, cried aloud, "I am trampled down and ruined. The wretch told me true. The night has come. Is there no way to rob them of further triumph and spurn their mercy and compassion? Is there no devil to help me?" He spoke no more, but after a pause softly groped his way out of the room and up the echoing stairs, up to the top, to the front garret, where he closed the door behind him and remained. It was a mere lumber room now, but it contained an old dismantled bedstead, the one on which his son had slept, for no other had been there. He avoided it hastily and sat down as far from it as he could. The weakened glare of the lights in the street below, shining through the window which had no blind or curtain to intercept it, was enough to show the character of the room there, though not sufficiently fully to reveal the various articles of lumber, old corded trunks and broken furniture which were scattered about. It had a shelving roof, high in one part and at another descending almost to the floor. It was towards the highest part that Ralph directed his eye, and upon it he kept them fixed steadily for 1 or 2 minutes. Then he rose, and dragging thither an old chest, the one upon which he was seated, mounted on it and felt along the wall above his head with both hands. And at length they touched a large iron hook, firmly driven into one of the beams. At that moment he was interrupted by a loud knocking at the door below. After a little hesitation he opened the window and demanded who it was. "I want Mr. Nickleby!" cried a voice. "What do you want with him?" "That's surely not Mr. Nickleby's voice," was the rejoinder. It wasn't like it, but it was Ralph who spoke. And so he said. The voice made answer that the twin brothers wished to know whether the man whom he had seen that night was to be detained. He was talking about Brooker, and that although it was now nearly midnight, they had sent in their anxiety to do right. "Yes," cried Ralph, "detain him till tomorrow. Let them bring him here, and he and my nephew, and come themselves, and be sure that I will be ready to receive them." "At what hour?" asked the voice. "At any hour," replied Ralph fiercely. "In the afternoon tell them, at any hour, any minute, all times will be alike to me." He listened to the man's retreating footsteps until the sound had passed, and then, gazing up into the sky, saw, or thought he saw, the same black cloud that had seemed to follow him home, and which now appeared to hover directly above the house. "I know its meaning now," he muttered, "and the restless nights, the dreams and why I had quailed of late, all pointed to this. Oh, if men by selling their own souls could ride rampant for a term, how short a term would I barter for mine tonight?" The sound of a deep bell came along the wind. "One!" "Lie on!" cried the usurer, "with your iron tongue. Ring merrily for births that make expectants writhe, for marriages that are made in hell, and toil ruefully for the dead whose shoes are worn out already. Call men to prayers who are godly but because not found out, and ring chimes for the coming in of every year that brings this accursed world nearer to its end. No bell or book for me. Throw me on a dunghill, and let me rot there to infect the air." With a wild look around, in which frenzy, hatred, and despair were horribly mingled, he shook his clenched hand at the sky above him, which was still dark and threatening, and closing the window, threw the rope over the hook and fastened it round his own throat. The rain and hail pattered against the glass. The chimneys quaked and rocked. The crazy casement rattled with the wind, as though an impatient hand inside were striving to burst it open. But no hand was there, and it opened no more. "How's this?" cried one. "The gentlemen say they can't make anybody hear. They've been trying these 2 hours." "Yet he came home last night," said another, "for he spoke to somebody out of that window up there." They were a little knot of men, and the window being mentioned, went out into the road and looked up at it. This occasioned their observing that the house was still close shut, as the housekeeper had said when she'd left on the previous night, and led to a great many suggestions, which terminated in 2 or 3 of the boldest getting round to the back and so entering by a window, while the others remained outside, impatient of expectation. They looked into all the rooms below, opening the shutters as they went to admit the fading light, and still finding nobody, and everything quiet and in its place. They doubted whether they should go further. One man, however, remarked that they had not yet been into the garret, and that it was there he had last been seen. So they agreed to look there too, and went up softly, for the mystery and silence made them timid. After they had stood for an instant on the landing, eyeing each other, he had proposed their carrying the search so far, turned the handle of the door and pushed it open, looking through the chink, and fell back directly. "It's very, very odd," he whispered. I think there's someone hiding behind the door. I can't get it open. Look." They pressed forward to see, but one among them, thrusting the others aside with a loud exclamation, drew a clasp knife from his pocket, and dashing into the room, cut the body down. Ralph had torn a rope from one of the old trunks and had hanged himself on the old iron hook immediately below the trapdoor in the ceiling, in the very place to which the eyes of his son, a lonely, desolate little creature, had so often directed in childish terror. 14 years before.